I was standing in my kitchen, sipping a cup of tea, when the letter came that would split my heart in two. It wasn't just a letter, it was an invoice. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, the neat black print glaring at me with cold indifference. At the very top, bold and smug, the words read, "Outstanding balance, $290,000. Below it, line by line, were expenses for a grand wedding venue, designer gowns, a luxury honeymoon, and even gratuity for event staff. At the bottom, scrawled in my grandson Michael's familiar handwriting, were 7 words that cut deeper than any knife. "Grandma, this is your responsibility to cover." I felt the room tilt. Just 2 days earlier, Michael had looked me in the eye and told me I was not welcome at his wedding. Not as a guest. Not as family. He had said it so casually, almost as if he was telling me the weather. "It's for the best, Grandma. You wouldn't fit in." Those words rang in my ears now as I held the paper. Not invited, but expected to pay for the whole thing? It was betrayal so sharp, so absurd, I nearly laughed. But instead, I cried. The motive was clear: greed. Cold, shameless greed. My grandson, the boy I had raised like my own son after his father died, wanted my money. He had always known I had saved over the years, a modest inheritance from my late husband, the pension I had carefully tucked away, and the house I kept in my name. I had told him stories of the sacrifices we made when life was tough, working 2 jobs while his mother struggled, patching up shoes instead of buying new ones, cooking simple meals so he would never go hungry. He knew every detail of my life because I had given him those stories freely, with love. I never imagined he would one day use them to calculate exactly how much he thought he could drain from me. My mind drifted back decades, to when Michael was only 8. I remember him clinging to me after his father's funeral, sobbing into my shoulder, his little voice muffled against my black dress, "Grandma, don't ever leave me." In that moment, I swore silently I would never let him feel abandoned, not by me. I paid for his schooling when my daughter couldn't. I bought his first car when he turned 16. I even dipped into my retirement to help with his college tuition. Every sacrifice, I made with love, because I believed he was my future, the continuation of our family. And now this. A demand letter. Not even a polite request. A bill, as if I were some faceless bank, not the woman who had rocked him to sleep when nightmares chased him at night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that paper for hours. My tea went cold, the sun shifted across the window, and still I sat there hollow. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. He didn't want me at his wedding, the most important day of his life, but he wanted me to fund it. I thought about all those moments I had imagined, seeing him smile at the altar, watching him dance, maybe even holding his first child someday. Those dreams now lay shattered on the floor, replaced by a receipt totaling nearly $300,000. The phone rang. It was my daughter, his mother. Her voice carried no apology, no shame. "Mom, I hope you got Michael's note. He and Sarah have been so stressed. The costs are insane, and you know you're the only one who can help. It's family. You'll do it, right?" I couldn't answer right away. My lips quivered. She mistook my silence for hesitation, not devastation. "Think of it as your gift to them," she added breezily, as if I hadn't already given them everything. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her where she had been when I worked double shifts, when my hands bled from scrubbing, when I pawned my jewelry to keep the lights on. But no words came. Just a deep ache in my chest, the kind that makes breathing feel like lifting weights. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories swirled in my head, colliding with the bitter present. I saw Michael as a toddler, his chubby hands reaching for me. I saw him as a teenager, smiling when I handed him keys to his first car. I saw him in his graduation gown, hugging me, whispering, "I couldn't have done this without you." Every image cracked like glass, replaced by the cold invoice that demanded I pay for his happiness I wasn't even allowed to witness. By morning, something inside me hardened. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on the counter. My hands no longer shook. The grief hadn't vanished, but anger had crept in alongside it. A dangerous, steady anger. I dialed Michael's number. He picked up after a few rings, his tone cheerful, expectant. "Grandma, did you see the invoice? We need the first payment wired by Friday." "Michael," I said slowly, carefully, "why did you ban me from your wedding?" There was a pause, the faint sound of laughter in the background. Then his voice, casual as ever, "It's nothing personal. Sarah thinks it'll be awkward. You wouldn't really get along with her family. But you understand, right? You'll still cover the costs. It's what families do." I gripped the phone tighter. His words were oil poured over flames. Nothing personal. He might as well have spit in my face. I didn't argue. Not then. My voice stayed calm, my words measured. "I'll think about it," I said before hanging up. But inside, a storm raged. Think about it? I had thought about nothing else since that envelope arrived. He wanted my money. My daughter supported him. And I was supposed to sit quietly, write the check, and be erased from their lives like I never existed? I walked through my house, each room echoing with decades of memories. The photographs on the wall, birthdays, holidays, graduations, now felt like mocking reminders of loyalty that had never been returned. My sacrifices had built his path, but he was cutting me out of the picture the moment it no longer served him. I stopped at the mantel where my late husband's portrait sat. His eyes, kind and steady even in the faded photograph, seemed to watch me. "What would you do?" I whispered. The silence answered back, heavy and suffocating. I knew then this wasn't just betrayal. It was war. Not with fists or guns, but with dignity, with truth, with a quiet strength I had honed over a lifetime of surviving. The question wasn't whether I would pay. The question was what I would do when I refused. I sat back down at the kitchen table, picked up the invoice, and studied it again. Line by line. Venue, $120,000. Dress, $30,000. Catering, $50,000. Honeymoon in the Maldives, $70,000. Each number felt like a weight pressing against my chest. Did he think I was blind? That I wouldn't see through the extravagance, the arrogance? He hadn't just asked for help, he had demanded my entire life's work, my security, my future. And beneath it all, the cruelest cut of all, he hadn't even thought to invite me. Not as a courtesy. Not as a token of respect. Nothing. That night, I opened my old lockbox. Inside were papers I hadn't touched in years. My will, property deeds, savings certificates. My future, carefully guarded, neatly organized. Michael thought he could manipulate me. He thought love made me weak. He had no idea what kind of strength love can turn into when betrayed. I placed the invoice on top of the papers and closed the lockbox. My decision wasn't clear yet, but one thing was, I wouldn't be their victim. Not anymore. The next morning, the phone rang again. It was my daughter, her voice sharper this time. "Mom, Michael said you sounded hesitant. Don't make this difficult. He deserves this wedding. You owe him that much after everything he's been through." Owe him? The word twisted like a knife. I had given him everything, and still they demanded more. I felt something break in me, not weakness but resolve. I realized then that this betrayal would not end with silence. Because sometimes, the cruelest betrayal plants the seed of the fiercest revenge. And as I hung up the phone, staring at the lockbox on my table, a thought formed, quiet, steady, unstoppable. If they wanted a war over money and respect, then I would give them one. But not in the way they expected. Not at all. The days after that phone call felt like walking through a fog of disbelief. Every time I tried to settle my mind, another memory of Michael's ingratitude rose to the surface, stabbing me all over again. The boy I had tucked into bed, the young man I had believed in, was now a stranger who treated me like a bottomless bank account. But the fog didn't last long. Soon it cleared, and what replaced it was a clarity as sharp as broken glass. The escalation began almost immediately. A week after the first invoice, a thick envelope arrived by courier. I slid it open with my old letter opener, expecting another demand, but this time the papers were far more sinister. It was a legal document, a proposed family support contract. According to it, I would agree to fund Michael's wedding and honeymoon, as a gesture of intergenerational duty. The language was slick, professional, clearly drafted by a lawyer. My name was typed neatly on the first line, and at the bottom was a space waiting for my signature. Attached was a note from my daughter, "Mom, it's just a formality. Don't be dramatic. Sign it and let's move on. We all know you want the best for Michael." My breath caught. A formality? This wasn't formality. This was entrapment. If I signed, It would be legally binding. They were trying to trap me, to turn decades of sacrifice into an obligation carved in ink. I placed the papers on the table and stared at them for a long time. My heart pounded with humiliation. They didn't even care about my presence, my love, my dignity. All they cared about was my money. And now they wanted to make it law. That night, I barely touched my dinner. I sat in the dark, listening to the tick of the clock, remembering all the humiliations I had already endured quietly. When Michael dropped out of his first year of college and I still paid for him to re-enroll. When he totaled the car I bought him and I replaced it without a word. When he borrowed thousands with promises to pay me back, promises that never came true. I told myself love was forgiveness. But now I saw what my forgiveness had done. It had taught him that cruelty could be rewarded. And now the ultimate insult, banished from his wedding, but chained to pay for it. The next morning, I walked into the office of my neighbor, Richard, who had been a lawyer before he retired. He was a kind man, widowed like me, who often helped me with small legal matters like property taxes and insurance. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the contract. "This is a trap," he said flatly. "If you sign this, they could sue you if you don't pay. They're trying to bleed you dry." Shame burned in my cheeks. "It's my own daughter and grandson, Richard. How could they?" "Because they think you'll never fight back," he said, looking at me over his glasses. "They're counting on your silence. Don't give it to them." His words sank into me like stones in water. Silence. That's what they expected. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. But something inside me had shifted. I didn't sign the papers. I tucked them back in the envelope and set it aside. And for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of defiance. But defiance alone wasn't enough. Because humiliation wasn't just in the legal tricks. It seeped into every corner of my life now. At church that Sunday, 2 women whispered near the pews. "Did you hear? Her grandson's wedding is the event of the year. Rumor is she's footing the bill." Another added, "Strange though. I heard she's not even invited." Their voices weren't cruel, just curious, but the shame burned all the same. The betrayal was spreading like wildfire, twisting into gossip, painting me as both the fool and the financier. I lowered my head and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. How could I pray for strength when I had let my own blood humiliate me like this? At the grocery store, I ran into Sarah's mother, the bride-to-be's mother. She smiled tightly, her tone dripping with condescension. "We're so grateful for your generosity, Mrs. Thompson. Not everyone could do what you're doing. It must feel good to give Michael such a grand start." Her words cut deeper than any knife. I forced a smile, but inside I was boiling. They were already spending my money in their minds. They saw me not as family, but as a sponsor. That night, as I sat in my lonely kitchen, Richard's words echoed again, "They think you'll never fight back." I opened my lockbox once more and spread out my papers, deeds, wills, savings. My life's work, laid bare on the table. If Michael and my daughter thought they could strip me of everything, they had another thing coming. But I needed a plan. The next day, I visited an old friend, Margaret, who had worked as an accountant before retiring. She was sharp as ever, with eyes that could see through numbers like glass. When I showed her the invoice and the contract, she let out a bitter laugh. "They're overreaching. And greedy people always overreach. That's where they trip." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the Honeymoon line. $70,000? Absurd. And the catering costs are inflated too. Someone's padding numbers here. If they push this legally, those details could be their undoing." A spark lit inside me. Undoing. That was the word I needed. But as I left Margaret's house, my phone buzzed with a message from my daughter. "Michael is disappointed in you. He said you were cold on the phone. Don't make this about yourself. It's his time to shine." Cold. The word made me laugh out loud, bitter and sharp. Cold? I had given everything warm in my life to that boy. My love, my time, my money. And now I was cold because I refused to roll over like a dog. That evening, Richard stopped by again, holding a stack of legal guides. "If they try to force this through, we can fight it," he said. "But you need to decide, are you willing to stop being the victim?" I looked him straight in the eye. Yes. The word came out steady, firm. For the first time, I believed it. Over the next week, the pressure escalated. Michael's fiancée called me directly, her voice dripping with disdain. "Mrs. Thompson, this wedding is going to be a society event. Do you really want to be remembered as the grandmother who ruined it? People will talk." I bit back my anger and simply replied, "People already talk." Then I hung up. 2 days later, I received another courier delivery. This time, it wasn't just a contract. It was a notice of intent. They were threatening to file suit for breach of family obligation if I didn't comply. The cruelty was staggering. My own blood, willing to drag me into court, to humiliate me publicly, just to strip me of money. But instead of fear, I felt a strange calm. Because by then, I had already made my decision. The victim was gone. The woman who had silently sacrificed, who had endured humiliation after humiliation, was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone who would not be erased, not be drained, not be used. That night, I sat at my table, pen in hand, and began drafting letters. One to my lawyer. One to the bank. One to my daughter. Each word was heavy, deliberate, fueled by the years of betrayal that had led to this moment. As I sealed the envelopes, I felt lighter, almost free. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to their cruelty. I was acting. And it was coming sooner than they thought. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty: they would never see it coming. Because I wasn't just refusing to pay. I was preparing to expose them. And when the truth came out, about their greed, their lies, their manipulations, it wouldn't just be whispers in church pews or smirks in grocery store aisles. It would be a reckoning. The morning after I sealed those letters, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The air itself seemed sharper, as though the universe had shifted ever so slightly, placing me at the center of a storm I was no longer running from. I had been betrayed, humiliated, threatened, and written off as weak. But they had made one mistake, a mistake that greedy people often make: they underestimated me. I brewed my tea slowly, savoring the familiar rhythm, and spread my papers across the kitchen table. Richard's words echoed in my mind: "They think you'll never fight back." Well, they were about to learn otherwise. The first step of my plan was simple: information. Greed leaves trails. People who inflate numbers, who forge obligations, who twist legal documents for their gain always leave something sloppy behind. I needed evidence, something that would expose them not just to me, but to the world. I began with the invoice Michael had sent. Every line item screamed excess, but Margaret's sharp eyes had already pointed out the most suspicious: the honeymoon and catering. I decided to verify. I called the catering company listed on the invoice, pretending to be a potential client interested in the same package. The receptionist cheerfully quoted me a figure nearly half of what Michael had listed. Half. He hadn't just asked me to fund his wedding, he had padded the bill, hoping I wouldn't notice. I hung up the phone with my pulse racing. Proof. Cold, hard proof. But I wasn't done. I called the luxury resort listed for the honeymoon, inquiring about a 2-week stay in the Maldives. Again, the number was significantly less than what Michael had written. Another lie. Another nail in the coffin. I carefully documented everything, printing out receipts, noting dates, gathering a trail of truth that would one day crush their scheme. The second step was trickier: finances. My daughter and Michael believed I had no one else, that I was isolated, vulnerable. They didn't know about the trust fund I had quietly set aside years ago after selling a small piece of land my husband had left me. That money wasn't much, but it was mine, hidden from prying eyes, untouchable. It meant I could move, act, even fight without relying on the accounts they expected to drain. That night, as I sat by the fireplace, I thought of all the sacrifices I had made to raise Michael. Every memory twisted like a blade, but it also fueled me. Love had blinded me once. Now it gave me the strength to fight. Days passed, and with each one, my plan grew sharper. I visited Richard again, laying out the evidence I had gathered. He whistled low when he saw the discrepancies. "They've overplayed their hand," he said. "If this went to court, a judge wouldn't just laugh them out of the room, they'd be exposed for fraud." Fraud. The word felt like justice itself. "Good," I said quietly. "Then let's prepare." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You're serious about this?" "I've been serious all my life," I replied. "It's time they learn that." While Richard began drafting a defensive strategy, I continued gathering information. I reached out to Margaret again, who dove deeper into the invoices. She found evidence of double billing, charges for services that didn't exist, and even fabricated taxes. It wasn't just greed, it was a scheme. A deliberate attempt to wring me dry through lies. Meanwhile, Michael and my daughter grew bolder. Texts came daily. "Grandma, the florist needs the deposit. Send $20,000. Mom, why are you delaying? People are talking. Just pay and stop making this harder. You know Michael deserves this wedding. Don't embarrass yourself." I saved every message. Every word was fuel. Every demand was another stone in the wall I was building against them. But beneath the steady resolve, doubt sometimes crept in late at night. Lying in bed, I wondered, was I strong enough for this fight? What if the family turned against me completely? What if, in the end, I lost them forever? Then I remembered, I had already lost them. The moment they sent that invoice, the moment they banned me from the wedding, they had made their choice. They had cut me out, not with scissors but with greed. The only thing left to lose was my dignity, and that was something I would never surrender. One evening, as I sorted through old photo albums, I stumbled across Michael's graduation picture. He was smiling, his arms slung around me, pride shining in his eyes. I traced his face with my finger and whispered, "You could have been so much more. But you chose this." Then I slid the photo back into the album and closed it. The next step of my plan was bolder, confrontation, but not yet public. I needed to test their arrogance, to see how far they would go. So I called my daughter. My voice was steady, but I let just enough weariness seep in. "I've been reviewing the invoices," I said. "Some of the numbers don't add up. Are you sure these are accurate?" Her response was sharp, defensive. "Mom, don't start this. Michael worked hard on those numbers. You're not an accountant. Just sign the contract and stop making a scene." Her tone revealed everything: guilt, impatience, and above all, fear of being caught. I played along. "I'll think about it," I said softly, then hung up. And in that moment, I knew the trap was working. They were cornering themselves with their own lies, and I was documenting every misstep. Still, the humiliation deepened. At the local community center, I overheard whispers again. "Poor woman. Paying for everything but not even invited." Another voice, "I heard they're suing her if she doesn't." My cheeks burned, but instead of shrinking, I held my head high. Let them whisper. Soon, the truth would roar louder than any rumor. Meanwhile, Michael grew reckless. He posted pictures online of luxury items he claimed were part of the wedding: designer suits, custom rings, a rehearsal dinner at an extravagant restaurant. Each post flaunted his excess, tagging friends with captions like "Thanks to Grandma for making this possible." The audacity was staggering. He was publicly claiming my generosity, while privately threatening me. But those posts? They became evidence too. Screenshots, time-stamped and saved, waiting for the right moment. Richard and Margaret were my quiet allies, but I knew the real battle would be mine to fight. Late at night, I rehearsed what I would one day say. Words of steel, words that would slice through their lies like a blade. But fate delivered me something I hadn't expected, a revelation that changed everything. It happened one afternoon when I received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a bill, not addressed to me, but mistakenly delivered. It was from the wedding venue, sent to Michael. The total was far less than the $120,000 he had claimed. My hands shook as I held it. Concrete proof, direct from the source, of his deception. I called the venue to confirm, pretending to be Michael's assistant. They verified the amount. Far less. Much more reasonable. The truth hit me like lightning. Michael hadn't just padded the bill. He had created an entirely false invoice for me, pocketing the difference. It wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was theft. It was manipulation. It was betrayal in its purest form. I sat in silence for a long time, the paper burning in my hands. This wasn't just greed. It was deliberate exploitation, a con orchestrated by the boy I had once held as my own son. And in that moment, any lingering doubt vanished. The war wasn't coming. It had already begun. But now I had the weapon that could end it. And I knew exactly where I would use it. I had always thought there were limits to selfishness. Boundaries. A point where even greed, even entitlement, had to stop and give way to common decency. But that assumption shattered the night I found myself staring at a second envelope, this one thick and official, stamped with the words "Final Demand." The first bill had shocked me into silence. The second one felt like an outright declaration of war. It arrived on a Friday afternoon. The mail carrier handed it to me with a tired smile, as though he didn't know that within that white rectangle was enough venom to choke me. I held it in my hands a long time before I opened it. My stomach twisted. I already knew what it was, yet some naive, battered part of me hoped it might be something different, an apology maybe, or even just a misunderstanding set right. But when I slit the envelope open with the butter knife, the contents confirmed my worst fears. Payment overdue. $290,000. Legal action will be pursued if balance is not cleared within 10 business days. Attached was a copy of the original bill, but this time highlighted sections had been added in red marker, as though to humiliate me. Family obligation, one line read. Joint responsibility as matriarch. The words burned. I sank into my armchair, staring at the neat little figures typed on paper, realizing for the first time that my grandson, the child I once rocked to sleep, had put me in a position where strangers might soon knock at my door demanding what wasn't theirs to take. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to check to know who it was. It was Ethan. His text read, "Grandma, I hope you've received the notice. I didn't want to push you, but this is serious. We can't move forward with the honeymoon plans until the finances are squared away. You understand, right?" The audacity left me dizzy. Not only had he barred me from his wedding, but he had the nerve to lean on me for his dream honeymoon. And the most twisted part? He wrote it all as if this were normal, as if I owed him, as if being alive and breathing meant my bank account was his to drain. I wanted to ignore him, to throw the phone across the room and pretend I hadn't seen his words. But anger flooded through me like a storm tide, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a clarity I hadn't before. I typed back, "No, Ethan. I am not paying. I will not fund your wedding or your honeymoon. Not now, not ever." I pressed send before I could second-guess myself. His reply came within seconds. "So that's it? After everything I've done to make you proud? After I invited you into my life, gave you the chance to be part of something bigger, this is how you repay me?" I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Invited me into your life? I had raised him, bathed him, paid for his schooling when his parents couldn't. And now he dared to twist the narrative, to paint himself as the benefactor. I didn't answer. I set the phone down and let the silence do the talking. But silence didn't protect me from what came next. That weekend, I attended a neighbor's birthday party. The music was cheerful, children ran across the lawn with balloons, and for a few precious hours, I let myself imagine life without this battle. But halfway through the cake cutting, a woman I barely knew leaned over and whispered, "I heard about Ethan's big wedding. Must be exciting for you, contributing to something like that." My fork froze midair. My heart stopped. I forced a smile. "Where did you hear that?" "Oh, everyone knows," she said lightly. "Ethan was telling people at the community center last week that his grandmother was the backbone of the whole celebration. Said you were footing the bill because you wanted him to have the wedding of the decade. Isn't that just lovely?" My throat went dry. The humiliation hit harder than any insult. Ethan had not only targeted me privately, but he was parading me publicly as his financier, weaving lies into his narrative so deeply that neighbors and strangers alike now saw me as complicit. I excused myself and went home, my hands trembling the whole way. That night, I sat at my dining table under the flicker of the old chandelier and pulled out a yellowed photo album. Page after page, I stared at Ethan's face, his chubby toddler cheeks, his awkward teenage braces, the graduation cap that nearly slid off his head. Memories of birthday parties, scraped knees, bedtime stories. Every picture screamed of the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made. I whispered aloud, "Where did I go wrong?" But no answer came. Just the tick of the clock and the occasional groan of the house settling. By Monday, things escalated again. A man in a suit knocked on my door. His smile was polite, but his eyes were sharp, predatory. He introduced himself as representing the event planning company. "Mrs. Whitaker?" he asked. I nodded. I'm here regarding the outstanding balance for your grandson's wedding arrangements. He held out a clipboard, and for a terrifying second, I thought he might shove it into my hands and demand my signature. I owe you nothing, I said firmly, forcing strength into my voice. His expression flickered, then hardened. With respect, ma'am, our records show otherwise. If this isn't cleared soon, there may be consequences. I felt the blood drain from my face. Consequences. The word echoed like a gunshot. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, shaking. It was no longer just Ethan's greed. He had dragged me into a mess that could spiral into lawsuits, debt collectors, maybe even the loss of my home. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table drafting something I never thought I'd have to write, a letter to Ethan. A final one. I wrote slowly, carefully, choosing words that carried the weight of both love and betrayal. Ethan, I cannot and will not pay for your wedding or your honeymoon. I have loved you since the day you were born, but love does not mean blind servitude. The way you have treated me, banning me from your wedding, reducing me to a checkbook, spreading lies about my support, has broken something I'm not sure can be mended. I will always be your grandmother, but I will not be your victim. I folded the letter, sealed it, and set it by the door. The next morning, I slipped it into the mailbox. My hands shook as the red flag clicked upright, signaling that my truth was on its way. But deep down, I knew Ethan would not accept my words quietly. He had shown me his true self, entitled, ruthless, manipulative. And people like that never walk away when they're denied. 3 days later, my prediction came true. I woke to find a message scrawled across my front door in black spray paint. 3 words, ugly and sharp. Pay or pay. The words were jagged, uneven, dripping down the wooden grain of my front door like an accusation. Pay or pay. For a long moment, I simply stood there in my robe, my coffee trembling in my hand, steam rising in the cool morning air. My neighbor's sprinklers hissed softly across manicured lawns, children rode bicycles up and down the street, and there I was, staring at proof that my own flesh and blood had turned into something unrecognizable. My grandson had threatened me. Not in whispers, not through veiled messages, but openly, boldly, as though I were a criminal who owed him restitution. I set the mug down before it shattered. My pulse hammered in my temples. I wanted to believe, desperately, that it wasn't Ethan. That maybe it was some overzealous wedding planner, some thug he'd foolishly involved. But deep down, I knew the truth. The handwriting was unmistakable, those angry capital letters, each one slanting forward, impatient, just like Ethan's scrawl on the birthday cards he'd once made me in crayon. I leaned against the wall and whispered to the empty house, "Oh Ethan, what have you done?" By mid-morning, I had scrubbed the door clean, though the faint outline of the paint still clung stubbornly. I closed the blinds, sat at the kitchen table, and forced myself to face the truth. This wasn't going to stop. I could pay the money and lose everything I'd built, or I could refuse and risk Ethan, or the people he'd entangled me with, escalating further. But a third option formed slowly, like dawn breaking across a stormy sky. I had been patient. I had given Ethan every chance to walk back his greed, to remember the boy I had raised. But he hadn't. Instead, he'd chosen deceit, humiliation, threats. And if he thought I was going to roll over, he had sorely underestimated the woman who had survived a war, a husband's death, and decades of sacrifice to keep her family afloat. That night, I opened a small lockbox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents, property deeds, old investments, dusty savings certificates. But among them lay something more valuable, Ethan's childhood letters. Scribbled notes in which he promised to be good forever, Father's Day cards he'd made me after his dad walked out, even a tear-stained apology from the time he'd stolen candy as a boy. I gathered them carefully, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. These were proof of who he used to be, and a painful reminder of who he had chosen not to remain. But I needed more than memories. I needed protection. The next morning, I walked into a lawyer's office. The receptionist looked surprised when I announced my name, but within minutes I was sitting across from a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Ms. Ramirez. I laid out everything, the bills, the harassment, the threats. I slid the photographs of my vandalized door across the desk, my voice shaking only once. Ms. Ramirez listened without interruption, her pen moving quickly across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back, tapping the pen against her chin. "Mrs. Whitaker, you are not responsible for your grandson's expenses. These so-called invoices are nothing more than extortion attempts. The threats and vandalism make this a criminal matter. If you're ready, we can take immediate action. Immediate. My voice cracked with both relief and fear. Restraining orders. A police report. And if he continues, we'll have grounds for charges. She paused, then softened her tone. You've carried this burden long enough. Let us carry it now. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without feeling like knives were lodged in my chest. That evening, I drafted a new letter to Ethan, not one of pleading or refusal, but a statement of fact. Ethan, your behavior has crossed a line that cannot be ignored. I have involved legal counsel. Any further attempts to harass or threaten me will result in criminal charges. I love you, but I will not be bullied by you or anyone connected to you. This is my final word. I did not send it by text, where his rage could flare instantly. I mailed it, official and cold, just as he had mailed me those invoices. Days passed. Then a week. The silence was deafening. No calls. No texts. No bills. My door remained clean. For the first time in months, I began to sleep through the night. Until one Thursday evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, my phone buzzed. It was a video link. From Ethan. My finger hovered over the screen, dread pooling in my stomach. I tapped it. The video opened with Ethan's face, his hair slicked back, his jaw tight. Behind him, fairy lights twinkled, the reception hall, I realized, glowing and full of life. Music swelled faintly in the background, the hum of voices rising in celebration. He was filming from his own wedding. Grandma, he said, his voice low but seething. This should have been the happiest day of my life. But instead, you've ruined it. Everyone here knows what you did. They know you turned your back on me. I don't care what kind of lawyer you've got, you can't erase the shame you've caused. You'll regret this. The video cut off abruptly. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. My chest ached, not just from fear, but from sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. He was gone. The boy I had raised, the boy who once clung to my hand in crowded grocery stores, who cried when his goldfish died, that boy no longer existed. In his place was a man poisoned by greed and arrogance. But as the tears blurred my vision, something else hardened inside me, resolve. If Ethan wanted to play this game publicly, then so be it. I would not cower. That weekend, I sat with Ms. Ramirez again. Together, we drafted a statement, not for the papers, not for gossiping neighbors, but for the truth. A notarized declaration of the harassment I'd endured, filed with the police, backed by evidence. 2 weeks later, Ethan was served with a restraining order. Word spread fast. Suddenly, the whispers that had once painted me as a doting financier of his wedding turned into a different story entirely. Neighbors who had once nodded smugly at me now looked at me with wide eyes, some with pity, others with shame for believing his lies. The silence from Ethan grew longer. Then one night, I received one final letter. The envelope bore no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You'll regret this, Grandma. Blood should be thicker than money. Don't forget that. I folded the letter and placed it in my file of evidence. I did not cry. I did not reply. Because here's the truth, Ethan was right about one thing. Blood should be thicker than money. But love, respect and decency, those are thicker than both. Without them, blood is just red water. And so I moved on. Not without scars, not without grief, but with the knowledge that I had drawn the line and stood firm. My door remained clean. My nights grew peaceful again. The echoes of his threats faded, replaced by the sound of my own quiet resilience. I will always remember the boy I raised. But I will not mourn the man he became. Some shadows, no matter how close to home, must be left behind. And if Ethan ever truly wanted to find his way back, he would have to do so without lies, without demands, without dollar signs attached. Until then, I remain what I have always been, a woman who gave her all and finally, refused to give it all away.